works because my laptop's broken again and I'm talking to a camera phone on top of a pile of books. But this is a video blog about the design process, how I went from the initial sketches right the way through to the final design. So fingers crossed, I'll be able to show you how we went from that, the initial sketches which were rejected, to the final design which you'll see on the blog. Okay. So you will have seen on the blog that I did tons and tons of research. I think there's 158 pages, but that isn't even all of it. I did tons, and from that I actually got a couple of very strong images, and WaveGen and wave power and the whole sustainability, all that sort of came into making a design for a wave-shaped building. So I did all the initial inspirational looking around, looking at different images that were inspiring, and I've got all that on the blog as well. But the actual physical design of the site and the building that went on top of it, I started in Vectorworks. So I printed off what the site was going to be in scale, and then printed it on screen paper, and printed that off, and then played with lots of bits of paper. And the reason I played with bits of paper is I made little sculpture-y bits. That's because, as my tutors will tell you, I'm not very good at sketching. I just don't think in sketch form. I tend to think in a more physical way. So from that we created what is now an incredibly bashed model. I will put onto the blog site an actual proper version of what it used to look like, because now it looks like it's been sat on. But what it was, a three-wave. I'll just do a little bit to explain what each one was, okay? So first, we had the underside, which was going to be a grid pattern made out of wood. I'd seen it in a magazine, thought it would look really interesting, but actually, on the underside, it technically can be done, but it would be quite difficult to have it on the underside of a curved roof. But it wasn't just that, it just looked really visually, it was just a bit distracting in comparison to what everything else we were going to have in the room. So that got rejected quite early on, and that's why I had larch cladding and nice just straight lines all the way through, so it had a nice curved shape to it. So printed out lots of little bits of paper. Didn't initially think that I was going to have three, but three fitted on the site quite nicely. And then with a little bit of sellotape, sort of bent them to look like crests of the wave. It still looks tragic, but they were there. They were really helpful. And this bit here is going to be the canopy, and I didn't initially have a canopy, but that really helped, because then you can see that underneath you've got extra space exterior to the exterior that you can actually use, and which is where I was going to put all the performance areas and the restaurants, and if people wanted to do practicing for sports and stuff like that and have a more outdoor lifestyle, that's why that came about. And the three waves weren't going to be in line. They were going to always be offset because it looks more like tumbling waves crashing onto the shore. So that's where that came from. And now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the next stage of the process, okay?
Here's a few pictures of the original models. You get a better idea of being able to look through them and seeing the underside, though ignore the grid ceiling because obviously that's gone out of the design quite early on.
Okay, so I do an awful lot of visual inspiration, and I print it off, and usually for every module I stick it all over the wall, which is not particularly good for the environment, but it means that I've got something in front of me that inspires me all the time. A lot of it, unfortunately, as you will see, has ended up in the bin. That was because I didn't know I was going to have to do this. But these elements up on here, such as the health centre in Villers-Rouillé, and some things by Gareth Hoskins, those sort of elements ended up into the design inspiration. And there was plenty more, but as I say, most of it's in the bin now. You'll be able to see all the visual inspiration. It's on a different video that is part of the blog site already. So after the initial inspiration and the visual inspiration and choosing materials, which is another one on the website, you'll be able to see how the design progressed. technology hasn't been getting on recently, and I then had no Vectorworks because my laptop totally broke and it was in the shop. So I had to draw. So I got myself some nice big A3 paper and started drawing different ideas about how everything was going to fit on the site. This is one of the ideas I had, to actually have the way going in and out of the landscape. It created different zones. It would have created nice like pod areas that people could have just used for performance and just for recreation purposes. But to be honest, it looked so visually messy and just filled up the entire site. But it was a bit too hard to navigate around, so that got rejected as well. And then we had to do side-on views, just so I could get an idea of how big the building could be, how many floors I could get in, and if I could get the amount of information that I wanted and the amount of exhibits into the site, which has ended up being a 3-storey building, which is a great idea at the time, but obviously 3 stories means an awful lot of work. So, a little bit more about this. There was an underground section originally, I thought, a bit like the UK Pavilion, which has the Sea Cathedral sitting on what looks like wrapping paper, and you entered underneath, which I thought would be really interesting, but how I ever was going to figure out how to do that on Vectorworks, I don't know. So I still had to sketch, and was able to plan out roughly the sort of scale of what I could fit underneath the canopy and in each section. So here I managed to get the lighting, and I sort of roughly did the lighting design that I ended up doing, and realised that I could get tables and chairs, which means I could do a restaurant. So playing with the side views while I didn't have any computer was quite helpful. Okay, so without a computer, all I had was dimensions. So I thought the best way was to make some models. And these look rubbish, but they are actually each floor, and they're actually done to scale. And I made little staircases and put them inside it, though all those have ended up in the bin. But it was handy just to know spatially how 3 stories and then another 3 stories next door to it and another 3 stories, how that would physically work. And it gave me a better idea of what I could fit into the space. Okay, so I'd done some drawings, got a computer back, and then did some more research and went back and actually looked over the research that I'd done and sort of pulled different things out for the elements that were going to be in the interior. So things like the oral history side came out, and definitely the immigration and the emigration came out, and then the ways room and all the different elements came out of that part of the research. And then I hit upon some of the Innovation Nation section and some of the universities and the work that they were doing, so that I could have some current new innovations in there rather than what everybody expects there to be when they think of Scotland. So that was the inspiration I got for that. And going back to that research meant I could then look at materials as well and try and find vernacular materials that I would be happy to use into the design. Okay, I was a little bit worried about the size of the site and the size of the actual buildings. I couldn't actually know if I could design something that would fit on the site and also spatially be able to take the amount of people that they were projecting that would go through a pavilion of that sort of size. So I thought things laterally and got hold of my Architecture Now book, as you can see, very well thumbed, and marked out buildings that were of the same size and the same volume internally that would have been on the site and could have fitted. So by actually looking at the size of some of these buildings, for example, I realised that actually the building I could design didn't have to be really, really small at all. And if I used several floors or actually used an underground section, then I could actually get quite a lot into it. So think laterally, because you can get things this size onto a site that we were given. So that was the Architecture Now book. Time was running out, because I hadn't had my laptop for so long, and I knew that Vectorworks was going to take forever, I started to actually panic about whether I was ever going to be able to finish the design itself in the time we had left. So what I did is I split the building into sections and concentrated on each of the 4 sections one at a time, starting with waves to watts, because I knew exactly what I wanted to have inside that building first. Printed off a little bit of Vectorworks just to get the idea of the scale of the building, and then drew everything and put it back in with a scanner and then photoshopped them up. So you'll see some of the images on here. I'll put them on so it's one zone at a time. One of the problems I had is that the diaspora sculpture, which I knew exactly what it was going to look like, I just didn't have time to physically make it. And I would have made a mock-up copy of it, and it would have been in clay, or worse, it would have been in paper. So what I actually resorted to was doing watercolours. They're not brilliant, but they were in the same tone of what the clay sculptures would be. And those were photoshopped, and once I put them through the scanner. And if I needed more detailed ones, did some of that, just to give the illusion that when the actual image was then projected on top of them, I could actually show in Photoshop and then show for the final presentation what the actual sculpture, because it is an interactive sculpture, would actually be like when you're actually standing there in a 360-degree cinema. So that's a way around things. Quite a lot of what I had to do was actually ways to get around things, just because you just don't have time to do everything. The one thing I would do is to not necessarily concentrate so much on the exterior design, which I had, which was such a strong image. And I knew what I wanted to put on the interiors, but I ended up having to fit what I needed to put on the inside into spaces that perhaps, in hindsight, if I'd have had more time, I would actually have designed the interiors first and then the exterior and fitted them around it. So that's one thing that I will learn for next time. It wasn't the best video blog in the world, but it gives you a little idea of the process from start to finish of the design process that I made for the pavilion. There would have been things I could have done differently if I'd have had more time, or if I'd have had a laptop for a lot longer. Then definitely the Vectorworks models would have been better, and I would have had a much better presentation to show you now. But you can have a look around the site and see an awful lot of information based on the research and the sketches and the final presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much.